Chapter 19. The Third Attack. Now that this treasure, which had so long been the object of the abbé's meditations, could ensure the future happiness of him whom Faria really loved as a son, it had doubled its value in his eyes, and every day he expatiated on the amount, explaining to Dante all the good which, with 13 or 14 millions of francs, a man could do in these days to his friends. And then Dante's countenance became gloomy, for the oath of vengeance he had taken recurred to his memory, and he reflected how much ill, in these times, a man with 13 or 14 millions could do to his enemies. The abbé did not know the Island of Monte Cristo, but Dante knew it, and he had often passed it, situated 25 miles from Pianosa, and between Corsica and the island of Elba, and had once touched there. This island was, always has been, and still is, completely deserted. It is a rock of almost conical form, which looks as though it had been thrust up by volcanic force from the depth to the surface of the ocean. Dante drew a plan of the island for Faria, and Faria gave Dante advice as to the means he should employ to recover the treasure. But Dante was far from being as enthusiastic and confident as the old man. It was a past question now that Faria was not a lunatic, and the way in which he had archived the discovery, which had given rise to the suspicion of his madness, increased Edmond's admiration of him. But at the same time, Dante could not believe that the deposit, supposing it had ever existed, still existed. And though he considered the treasure as by no means chimerical, he yet believed it was no longer there. Chapter 19, here we are. Oh, I'm sorry, everyone. Oh, it has been a long day here at the Gruntwork Podcast Studios. And I am just getting started on the Count of Monte Cristo. Excited to start a new chapter. I always get excited because I never know where it's going to take us, and it always has a shift. Okay, let's go real broad with this, real general about books and literature. New chapters, in storytelling, you're always divulging new information. You're always giving new depth to character, turning the stories in ways you didn't go. And chapters, oh my God, am I really fucking mansplaining chapters to people? Is that what I've come to? Chapters, to me, are exciting because it's a good, resting point for my brain. And I'm gonna make this very personal so that I don't proclaim to be some sort of expert on how the chapter came to be or some other nonsense that I usually spout off here. But for me, when I'm reading, I really enjoy chapters. I know a lot of people just will put their bookmark wherever they stop reading for the day, whether it's the middle of a chapter, if they're falling asleep at night. For me, I like a good chapter break because it allows me to pause and process everything that has happened to that point, both in terms of the chapter itself, but also how the information provided in that chapter changes the story that we've been reading thus far. When I read, I have a little ritual I do in the morning. Well, I'll go downstairs, I'll make my cup of coffee, my pot of coffee, who am I kidding? My apple with some cinnamon on it, and a slice or two of Dave's Killer Bread with some peanut butter and chia seeds, some raisins if I ever have any. I'll sit there and I'll read in my nook. Sometimes my cat joins me and sits on my lap, and I will read through a chapter, and then I'll pause. I won't just keep reading, even though I read for a while in the morning. It's kind of my centering ritual for the day. I'll pause. I'll sit there for 10 minutes or so after each chapter, most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, and really just try to absorb what is going on. Sometimes I have to go back and re-reference things because my mind drifts. Sometimes right now, I'm currently in the middle of the 5th book in the Dune series, Heretics of Dune, and there's a lot of information, a lot of characters, a lot of subtle politics and manipulation and character dynamics to keep in mind, and the implications of all of that stuff that we are, pulling out episode by episode here. But I like to sit and just kind of pull that apart. So, that's why I get excited with new chapters, because I never know what new information or twist on the story it's going to bring. And bringing it back to today's little passage here, this is no different. We learn quite a few things that go by quickly in this kind of overview way it's written, but let's break them down for a second. So we're talking about the treasure still, and Faria has changed his tune on it a little bit. Or really, it's kind of, his character has developed more with his relationship with Dante. Now he looks at the grand total of how much money is there and thinks of how much good it can do in the world, specifically for Dante, who he now loves as a son, but what Dante and his, hopes and ambitions and good intentions will do with that money for himself, for his friends, for the world. While Dante, this is the sort of thing that is subtly introduced and can create like major character moral dilemmas down the line. So we get Faria's perspective on that, but then it counters by saying Dante became gloomy because his oath of vengeance made him think not all the good he can do in the world, but all the bad he can do in the world. Think of how much harm he can do his enemies. Now, let's break that down into parts. One, the moral ticking time bomb, if you will, is if something should happen to Faria, I guess, do we need to look at the title of this chapter, The Third Attack? If something were to happen to Faria and he's trying to imbue this kind of positive outlook into Dante to do well in the world, but Dante has hate in his heart, there will come that's going to set up a character who is constantly pursuing vengeance, in his own words, to the oath he has sworn, and yet with every act he goes against Faria's belief in him is going to push him in some direction or another, maybe further down the rabbit hole, or that will be the thing that redeems and saves him. But it's set up here so simply, and this is the kind of seed of it. The second part that we need to talk about is that, unless I missed something, and I don't think I did, but knowing who I am, I can't admit that it's 100%. We never learned what Dante's oath was. Now, was Dumas just assuming that we would make the leap to just understand that Dante was making an oath of vengeance when he was in his cell, the oath that he didn't ever tell Faria, at least not, to our reader's eyes? Or is this the first time that he is mentioning it explicitly as an oath of vengeance against his enemies? And of course, we know who those enemies are, because going into the prison, Dante didn't think he had any enemies, and then Faria basically gave him a hit list, and now he does. So he is dreaming of how much all of that money can do to accomplish vengeance on Villefort and Danglars and Fernand, and maybe Gedrus. Okay, well, that's a lot. Then, also, as well, Dante knows the Island of Monte Cristo. Now, I covered that in a previous episode, trying to think back to the, early chapters where Dante said that he and Danglars had a bit of a spat and were going to settle it by setting anchor at the Island of Monte Cristo. And Danglars was like, nah, you know what, on second thought, maybe not. And they didn't actually end up doing it. But Dante does say that he has passed it many, many times and even touched there once. And he can confirm that it is a deserted island entirely. So I'm not quite sure what that has to do with it yet, except that Dante knows how to get there. I guess. I mean, like, that part of the plan isn't going to be difficult for him, because once he escapes from this place, he's going to know exactly where to go, possibly with Faria in tow over his shoulder as he's swimming. Is he going to swim there the entire way? Who knows? Okay, sorry, this is a long episode to get us started with Chapter 19, but I'm going to end it there, and we will continue with a somewhat shorter chapter than normal, but that's okay. We got a lot of cool stuff to cover. I'll see you here all tomorrow for more of Chapter 19. Until then, okay, goodbye. The Countdown of Monte Cristo is part of the Gruntwork Podcast Network. This show is produced, edited, and hosted by Landon Solano. The original text of The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Theme song by Magic Solo. If you want to support the show and others like it, visit patreon.com/gruntworkpod. Thank you for listening. See you tomorrow.